Hi, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topic for tonight is Biden's risk to democracy and dumping the corruption. Uh, I've just finished the Around the World with Dee and Friends show. Dee Pierce, the host of that show, is just winding that up. And she will be over here in just a minute. But meanwhile, okay, I'm going to get on with this talk. So, if you were watching last Friday, you know that our discussion then was focused on Trump's risk to democracy. Here's Dee Pierce now. Hello,
Hello.
Dee. Our show last Friday was focused on Trump's risk, to democracy and the relationship of the dumping the corruption movement, of course, to that. And so it seemed only fair to schedule this show for tonight, which is about Biden's risk, to democracy. In other words, you're going to hear a lot, from the Democrats about how voting for Trump is a tremendous risk uh, um, um, to democracy. For us, actually attaining democracy, because Trump is very likely to try to forge a dictatorship if he's elected again. And I do agree with people who warn about that. And I do agree with the risk. And you can watch that show, the Friday show, and you can see there are a lot of reasons to believe in that particular risk. Okay, but I thought that I would have a very incomplete analysis if I only covered. Hi, Kay. Kay Ryan is here. Okay, if I only covered the risks that Trump poses to democracy, it would be quite unfair if I only did that. I have to also to deal with, to be fair, the risks that Biden poses to democracy. Okay, so Dee, is there anything you would like to say to start us off in this particular?
The issue of Joe Biden, it's a situation now that even the Democrats are looking for someone else. And the issue, it's just not a good issue at all. I mean, but we're going to get the same people where Biden is concerned. And it seems like he's got his group that's running the show. And those same people will continue on to another administration. So nothing basically is going to change, or fundamentally will change, if Biden were to be elected again, or whoever they put in his place to be the next puppet.
Okay, let's be systematic about this. I'm just going to list some threats. One threat, from the reelection, of Biden, is that we're going to have the continuation of hugely dishonest form of politics that will be coming from the Democratic Party. Communications, propaganda communications that are dishonest. Also, lies by Biden, very, very frequent lies. Of course, we tend to brush that off as, politics as usual. But what I want to do when I talk about essentially dishonesty is one of the major issues is dishonesty corrodes democracy. It really does. If your leaders are more and more and more and more and more dishonest year after year, lying about everything, what happens to your democracy? Well, one thing that happens is support for democracy fades among the public because people don't trust their supposed but democracy anymore. I know it's debatable if we ever had one here in the United States, but certainly we were much closer to one during the late 1960s and the early 1970s than we are now. Okay, and part of the reason, okay, is that the presidents we have had, have been liars. Every one of them. The Republican presidents, okay, and also the Democratic president. I'm going to say something might be controversial. I don't. It doesn't seem controversial to me. Uh, it seems to me Jimmy Carter was the last of the relatively honest presidents. I'm not going to say our presidents before that time were always honest. I know FDR lied on occasion. I know Harry Truman lied on occasion. I know that Eisenhower lied on occasion. I don't think Kennedy lied very much. Okay. I know Johnson had big lies when it came to the Vietnam War. Very big and very, very damaging lies that undermined our democracy. I think Ford and Carter were relatively honest, especially Carter, though there were one or two cases where he lied too. I think that Reagan did quite a bit of lying, especially in foreign policy. And since Clinton, it's Katie bar the door. Just Katie bar the door. I mean, Clinton just lied through his teeth all the time. He had no compunction about it. Same was true of Bush. The same was true of Obama, who hid his lies in various ways. A lot of them were lies of omission, okay, various kinds. He was a master at that. For example, he would give public speeches telling people about the alternative options that they had for certain kinds of policies. His favorite trick was to discuss only the options that he found to be completely unacceptable and the options that he was more or less favorable to. Okay. But options that he didn't want to talk about at all because the people favored them, but he didn't. He just failed to mention in any of the policy options. That was his favorite trick, to try to control the debate. And to manipulate the flow of information. Trump, of course, was notorious for his lying, just notorious. All the way along, he just lied. So now we come to the administration of Joe Biden. And the first thing that he does is he abandons the $2,000 check and will only support a $1,400 check in the American Rescue Plan, giving some crazy rationale that Trump had already given a $600 check So he was just giving the other $1,400 of the $2,000 he promised. But he didn't promise the $2,000 until after Trump's $600 check was out the door. There were 2 Senate elections that were won in Georgia based on his promise of $2,000 checks.
Hmm.
And he just lied about that. You know. So people were out $600 because he lied. He could have gotten the American Rescue Plan passed with the extra $600. It wouldn't have killed the bill. I mean, nobody would be ready to say, well, I'm good for $1,400, but I'm not good for $2,000. That wouldn't have flown if it was fought, okay, on that basis. It was he who decided he didn't want to give up $2,000 checks. Then he broke his promise on $15 an hour, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. That was in the platform of the Democratic Party, and it was one of his promises. And he immediately broke it by taking the position, I have great respect for the parliamentarian in the Senate. He then put forward, an American Family Plan. Detailed plan, a very good plan. But he wouldn't fight for it. He allowed Sinema and Manchin to drag him off it oh so easily. There was no fight at all for the American Family Plan. He wouldn't extend the tax credits that he had promised any further than the short amount of time that they were given, in the American Rescue Plan. There were promises made to the progressives that deals would not be made, on infrastructure without, including the extensive green infrastructure that the progressives wanted. Those promises were broken. Biden and Nancy Pelosi and Pramila Jayapal all monkeyed around with that, and they failed to deliver anything like that. Biden promised there would be the elimination of a substantial amount of student debt. So what does Biden do? He puts an executive order forth based on his authority under the CARES Act. Much weaker authority than he had under the Education Act of, I guess it was the Education Act of 1965. He chose the wrong act to base his authority on. The Supreme Court turned him down. So he lost that. Some people might think, well, this was out of stupidity. It was a mistake. I think that's baloney. Everybody was screaming at him that the Education Act was the right thing to use at the time. He didn't listen to them. He did what he wanted to do, knowing that the risk of being turned aside by the Supreme Court was greater. Biden promised resistance to the efforts by the Republicans to gerrymander and voter suppress the hell out, of voting. Biden couldn't get any of those bills passed. Not a thing when it came to voting rights. Nothing to contend with the Supreme Court. He promised the codification of Roe v. Wade. Why didn't he do the codification as his first bill out of the gate when his popularity was at its highest? He didn't really want the codification of Roe v. Wade. He was happy to use it to raise money. So, what does this do to democracy when your presidential candidate is making all kinds of promises and fulfills very few of them in his first term? That kills the faith in democracy that people have. That kind of activity kills the
Yes, it does.
faith in democracy people have.
And I
Why?
was going to say something about Joe Biden when it comes to Roe v. Wade
Please do.
and not codifying it, is the fact that he will stick his religion in. He'll start talking about the Catholic Church, start putting theocracy in it when it should not be put into the government. And that's what I can't stand, is when people stand there and throw religion in when it has no place in the government.
Yes, I can't stand that either, but uh, there is the situation that he promised the codification of Roe v. Wade. The Democratic Party promised it.
Right. And their word means nothing.
Their word means nothing. Then they go back and they try to make the same promises again. Their word means nothing. I'll tell you, Trump lies all the time. And that's corrosive of democracy because he's always lying. But Trump did make certain promises. And the main promises he made, he fulfilled. He promised to reward his rich cronies. He did that in spades. He promised to renegotiate, the NAFTA agreement. He did renegotiate it, and he renegotiated it so it became a better agreement. He said he would do certain things at the border. He did his damnedest to do those things at the border. We may not agree with those things, but he had a better record of doing what he said he was going to do than Biden did. What do we think of an administration that obviously only listens to its donors and does not pass bills the people want? Of course, this is not only Biden that we've had this from, but popular opinion overwhelmingly supports a Medicare for All bill. This president said from the beginning, if this crosses my desk, I'm going to veto it, even though 70% of the population wants it. What kind of democracy is that? What kind of democracy, is that? Now I get to probably the most serious thing that he did as president. Of course, it threatens our democracy. But not only our democracy, it threatens our very lives. Until Biden provoked the war, in Ukraine, and until he and his foreign policy hands followed the policy of unlimited support for Ukraine in that particular war, we had no serious threat of a nuclear war among the major powers of the world. We hadn't had any serious threat since the United States and the Soviet Union came together in the middle 1980s. It's nearly 40 years. We haven't been living under the nuclear gun. Biden put us under the nuclear gun without any congressional action, without any serious debate, without any kind of buy or leave from our democracy. He manipulated the situation to give Putin very little choice. Now, I don't agree with all those who say, and there are a lot of them who say, that Putin did have a choice. He could have taken it to the United Nations. What good would that have done? Would it have made any difference to the United States? Would it have stopped the armaments that were going to Ukraine? The buildup of the Ukraine army from 2014 to 2022 when the war started? Putin tried to appeal to the Obama administration, to the Trump administration, and then to the Biden administration, always objecting, don't take Ukraine into NATO. That is a red line. We will not allow you to cross that line without any consequences. Biden wouldn't even answer his calls, Putin's calls. When the situation was getting hot at the end of 2022, at the end of 2021, and into January and February of 2022, Biden wouldn't even talk to Putin during those periods of time. He was clearly signaling, we don't give a damn what you think. We're going ahead with this. We're going to get by Ukraine into NATO. Whatever you think, he was clearly signaling that. As we all know, the war in Ukraine has brought us to the brink of nuclear war for the first time in nearly 40 years. That's where we sit now. If Biden is reelected as president of the United States, will he continue the policies that he and the neocons and his administrations, the Victoria Nulands, who just got a promotion to Deputy Secretary of State, will he and they continue the policies they're following now, which, by the way, seem to involve maybe cooling off the Ukraine situation, but in its place, ramping up the hostilities with China? I could say so much about, and have said so much in my Tuesday programs, about what's happening as a result of the apparent coming victory of the Russians, in the Ukraine war. I've said all kinds of things about that. You can go back to my broadcasts, check it out. There are all kinds of consequences. And all of those are harmful to democracy in the United States. But especially harmful is subjecting the people of the United States and the people of the world to the risk of nuclear war by the nuclear superpowers. The Biden administration is not completely responsible for this. The buildup to it we saw in the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and even as far back as the Bush administration. But the last nails in the coffin of creating that nuclear risk again were driven by the Biden administration and by the neocons. They bear the responsibility of putting you and I and our children and grandchildren and our very civilization in danger. And don't think if there's a nuclear war, that's not going to ramp up the climate emergency. It will. So if any of us survive the nuclear war, we're just going to have the climate emergency to contend with after that. So, that's not only a threat to our democracy, it's a threat to our very lives. I should say our chances for democracy, because we don't have a democracy now. Okay, is there any more? The oligarchy that runs our country has been strengthened during the Biden administration, not weakened. Biden and his nothing will fundamentally change if I'm the president. Is he going to run on anything else except nothing will fundamentally change? What's he going to say this time? If nothing fundamentally changes, then our democracy is getting gradually snuffed out by the oligarchs, making it completely meaningless. That's what we're getting from the Democrats. What is the Democratic Party itself? It is an oligarchy controlled by the rich. What is the Democratic Party in Congress? It is an oligarchy controlled by the rich and their donations and their contributions. What is the Democratic Party in the country? The mass of members of the Democratic Party. That is a group of well-meaning people, totally propagandized, totally manipulated, totally used by the oligarchs. Very little resistance. And now we get to the next subject. Biden promised resistance to the oligarchy. He promised resistance to Trumpism. Well, what has he done? He appointed an attorney general who temporized for 2 years when it comes to doing anything about Donald Trump. And here we are, we're finally getting some indictments. But it's getting so close to the election of 2024 that we may not have time to complete the trials before the election of 2024 takes place. And if Trump wins, he takes office again. So the resistance of the Biden administration to the Trump threat has been extremely ineffective. And look at the polls, because Biden broke all his promises, well, many of his promises anyway, most of them, to do good things for the American people. What does he have to run on? The key resistance to Trump is that people, you've done right by them. And therefore, they'll vote for you and not for Trump. Biden doesn't have a record like that. He's got a record of failure. He's got a record of failing to fight his way through Congress. He's got a record of failing to produce results for the American people in his first 2.5 years. And now he's got only a year and a half left. He's lost control of the House. Okay, the House is in the hands of the Trumpists. He's got very little power left. By the way, how about his lack of any substantial resistance to the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court flips on Roe v. Wade. And Biden just tries to say as little about it as he possibly can. Why didn't Biden just say to the Supreme Court, look, I'm a constitutional officer just like you. Your power of judicial review isn't explicit in the Constitution. It's a power you have arrogated to yourselves. In my view, Roe v. Wade, the earlier decision of the Supreme Court, was right in its evaluation of the constitutionality. Your latest decision is wrong. I'm not going to obey that. So far as I'm concerned, Roe v. Wade still stands. And I won't enforce anything else except for Roe v. Wade. And I will enforce that to the extent of my ability to do so. Why didn't he say that? When the Supreme Court has made its ridiculous decisions on voting rights across the country, invalidating portions of important laws, basically neutering the Voting Rights Act of 1965, why didn't Biden say, I'm a constitutional officer, same as you. I don't agree with you on this decision. I'm going to enforce the Voting Rights Act, whatever you say. And you don't have anything to say about that. Because as far as I'm concerned, your power of judicial review is at issue. The question I'm raising is, what resistance has Biden made to the Supreme Court, which is undermining our rights every single year, more and more quickly? What resistance has he given? None. The Supreme Court is undermining our democratic rights, one after another, year after year. And Biden does nothing and says nothing.
And the public is waiting for him to act.
The public is waiting for him to act. What happens if he's elected again? You'll have this Supreme Court continuing to take away our rights, and Biden will do nothing. He will continue undermining democracy. He will undermine democracy because of decisions by the Senate, the parliamentarian. He will undermine democracy because he'll refuse to get rid of the filibuster. And last, maybe I shouldn't say last, there are two other things I want to talk about involving the undermining of democracy by the Biden administration that we can expect to have continue if he is reelected. The first is his willingness to follow policies that are arguably unconstitutional when it comes to public health. I'm talking about the vaccine issues, of course, and the inadequate testing, of the vaccines, and the lying by federal authorities in the Trump administration and in the Biden administration concerning the effects of the vaccines, the relatively untested vaccines for their long-term effects. He has not been allowing the free flow of information. The federal government has been undermining information doctors are sending out concerning the results of experiments and field studies and clinical studies that they have done. And the Biden administration engages in attempts to call that disinformation and misinformation, and malinformation. The Biden administration even appointed a czar of misinformation at one point. His czar was so stupid that didn't last more for a month or two than a month or two. But the motivation behind it, the attempts to discredit and to ignore debate within the scientific community over public health, that is ruinous to our democracy. And the final thing that I want to bring up is the censorship. Now, we all know that's Bobby Kennedy's favorite issue. I know it's Bobby Kennedy's favorite issue. That doesn't mean that it's not one of the most important issues. It's clear now from facts that have been revealed by Twitter and Facebook and a number of other sources, and the Twitter files, that the federal government has been calling for censorship of people on Twitter who are producing information for other people to read. And there are no criteria for censorship. It's not systematic. It's not in any way justified. It's not passed through. It's not passed through the Congress, at all. It's just the executives in the federal government calling and pressuring the private corporations who are running social media to suppress certain information that the federal government does not like. Now, you may say, that's not prohibited by the Constitution because it's not a violation of free speech or free press by the federal government. The Congress isn't passing any law which allows that kind of censorship. And that is true, but what the executive branch is doing, in other words, the Constitution says Congress shall pass no law. But what the First Amendment is about is that government shall not censor. And government is combining with the social media companies to censor us. That is so dangerous. Social media companies have become the public square. It's just as dangerous as shutting down people who are speaking in the public square for various reasons. By the way, the Biden administration does not hesitate either to shut down assemblies of various kinds when it desires to do that. But just sticking to the free speech issue, the judge's decision, the recent decision by a federal judge to prohibit the federal government from calling up the social media companies to ask them to censor certain kinds of content, that decision was a good one. And I hope it holds and is not reversed, okay, at any level. I expect it will be by the Supreme Court. Well, that's not actually directly relevant here. Okay, so okay. I think Robert Kennedy is very right about the censorship issue, but I don't even think that is the point. What we're talking about is the likelihood of the undermining of democracy by Joe Biden. All of the examples that we've given you in this stream are about, and I know I haven't exhausted this at all. I haven't been completely systematic, in my development of this. To do so, would take months of research. And I'm a streamer. I don't have time to put in the months of research on that. But I think I've said enough, to indicate that the threats to democracy from Biden, I'm not going to say they're just as serious as Trump. In some ways, they're more serious. In other words, the risk of nuclear war is something that is likely to be less under Trump than under Biden. But in many other ways, they are less than the risks from Trump, who would actively pursue a dictatorship. So I'm not going to say the risks are less on one side, than the other side. What I'm going to say, what I'm trying to say here, the message I'm giving, is that both these candidates are unacceptable. The parties are trying to shove them down our throats. We have to do something to stop the parties from doing this. The parties are oligarchies. They're selecting these two unacceptable people and shoving them down our throats. We have to stop that. You know the way we can stop it, because I've talked about that enough. I've talked about it until it is absolutely coming out of my ears and yours too. But that doesn't make it a method that we need to avoid. We need to use the method of dump the corruption. It needs to become a movement. It has to become a movement so popular that people really do agree that they're going to do that when they go to the polls, that they're going to vote against people who are taking big money. That will get both Trump and Biden out of our hair. And it will get both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party out of our hair. If we refuse to vote for either of these two candidates, if they are nominated, I assume they will be, because they're taking the big money, That is what we need to do to avoid the unacceptable result that one of them becomes the president of the United States in 2025. By 2025, we have to be free of them. We have to be welcoming a new president that is not taking the big money, a new president that we own through our small donations and our votes, and not a new president that they own because of the huge donations they have made. That means that not only do we need to accept the rule to throw these guys out, but we also need to be fully aware that what the mainstream media is telling us about voting third party, or what the mainstream media is telling us about the two candidates, the candidate of the Democratic Party, the candidate of the Republican Party, we're going to hear that stuff every day. We have to ignore it because it is never the truth. It is never the truth. I mean, maybe a broken clock is right twice a day, but I don't think the mainstream media is right twice a day. They're giving us a load of bull, continuous bull, all the time. And we got to stop listening to them. Our sources of news have to be the independent media. We have to ignore the mainstream media because we've been subject to continuous propagandizing by them. And we have to reject the propagandizing, and we have to stick to the method, which means also that we have to stick to the rule. Forgive me while I take a moment to find the rule, which for some reason I've gotten rid of since the last I spoke on this last week. I guess I goofed on that one. Okay, I got it. It was easy, I just searched. Just searched the history. So once more, to end this and go to your comments, I remind you of the rule. This is, after all, a Dump the Corruption show. Vote against every candidate except those who won't take money from wealthy corporations, wealthy individuals, PACs, or party committees, and who repudiate all super PAC support. Now, I freely admit this may mean that you will need to vote against also Bobby Kennedy, because he seems to be starting off his campaign with considerable support from wealthy individuals and super PACs. So I'm well aware that following the rule might exclude him, but it also might not, for two reasons. The first reason is he might stop taking the money from these sources during his campaign and rely solely on small donations. And the second reason is he may rely far less on these particular sources than the other competitors running in the Democratic Party. In which case, he would be the best alternative because depending on the ratio of small dollar donations to the big money, in the end, he may still come out looking very well. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. Okay, Dee, do you have any other thoughts?
It's just a tough place. The U.S. citizens, it's a tough place we're put in.
It's a tough place we're put in, but we have to fight back.
Yes, we do, and we have to dump the corruption. That's the only answer, because as we clearly see, that is who they represent. Whoever the donors are, that is who they will represent.
And so that is the only way to fight back.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot fight back, in any other way. Okay, if you say, well, yes, we can, we'll vote for a third party, advising people to only vote for third parties hasn't worked in the past. We've been doing that for some time, advising people to vote green. I mean, there isn't even one congressional office filled by a Green Party member. In fact, I don't even think one has come close.
And I just want to say something.
Go
This
ahead.
just came across the media that in Ecuador, Ecuadorian presidential candidate known for speaking up against corruption was shot and killed Wednesday at a political rally in the capital, and it was confirmed by the president of Ecuador. This is Fernando Villavicencio. I thought interesting because here we're doing a Dump the Corruption show, and the person that's been speaking out against corruption was recently assassinated.
Okay, the president of Ecuador, if I recall correctly, is actually Guillermo Lasso, isn't he? Okay, at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not sure who the president of Ecuador is. Okay, I believe there was a, let's see. I've forgotten the recent history, of Ecuador. I wish that Madeline was here, to remind me. But the current president, of Ecuador, I believe is right wing, is he not?
I believe so. I'm going to look it up now.
Okay. Yeah, I think he's a member of the oligarchy.
Yes. Guillermo Alberto Santiago Lassa Mendoza. He is a businessman, banker, and politician who has served as the 47th president of Ecuador since May of 2021. He's the country's first conservative president.
Okay, that is Guillermo Lasso, I think.
Yes.
In other words, those are two of his four names, right?
Yeah, Guillermo Lasso is what the picture here is.
Yes. He is a right-wing oligarch. And he won the presidency by cheating the indigenous candidate, in Ecuador. And now he's ensured that he will probably continue to be the president because they've arranged for the assassination of the popular indigenous candidate, which they've accomplished. By the way, this whole thing probably had the support of the United States, which has been supporting the right wing oligarchs in Latin American countries forever, and is doing everything it can to turn back the pink tide down there. But getting back to the main point, the only way we can resist and actually get a democracy here is to get rid of the donor money in politics. The only way to do that is to make it toxic, so the money turns against itself. We have the power to make it turn against itself. That power is inherent in the rule that I just gave you. Following that rule, I think all will be well. By the way, one of the reasons why all will be well is because we are not putting forward any particular candidate. So there's no one in particular for the right wing to assassinate. In other words, we're just saying vote against people taking donations, and after that, just vote your conscience. We're not recommending any particular candidate. What we're recommending is voting against those candidates who are taking the big money, those candidates who are bought. By the way, if any people start running from the No Labels Party, don't be fooled by that party. That's a big money party. They've been supported by billionaires from the very beginning of No Labels. I believe it began in 2010, or 2011. It's been around for a long time. And it's always had big billionaire money behind it. One of the main backers of it when it started was Peter G. Peterson. So there are third parties that are going to be big money parties. And you have to realize that, and you have to vote against their candidates also. So let's go over some of the comments, or maybe all the comments. There's Robert Copeland. Most politicians lie after they get into office. Yes, that's right. They do lie. We got to stop taking it anymore. We got to stop taking the lies. We have to make the lies a big issue. There should have been a big movement to impeach Biden when he sent out $1,400 checks instead of $2,000 checks. We betrayed ourselves by not creating such a movement. He lied. It's on the video, goddammit. On January 4th of 2021, when he was campaigning down in Georgia, for the two Senate candidates down there, for Jon Ossoff and the Reverend, I don't know, his name escapes me now. He's not bad, by the way. He's a pretty good senator, as they go. When he was campaigning for those two, he promised a $2,000 check. After the Trump $600 checks had been sent out, he promised a $2,000 check. You can check the video record. It's quite plain. He promised it. He lied. He must have known he wasn't going to send out the $2,000 check then. Robert Copeland, we're not going to get Medicare for all unless we vote out most of the people in Congress and vote in a new president that supports Medicare for all. Right you are, Robert. And we're not going to get most of the people out of Congress and vote in a new president that supports Medicare for all unless we follow the rule. Jeff Denton says, remember that poll showing 70% is 6 freaking years old, and we're supposed to think that has remained frozen in a pandemic. I don't think it's remained frozen. I'll bet it is more than 70% right now. More than 70%. How about all the additional debt that was taken on by people during the pandemic? Robert Copeland says, my member in the House and one of my U.S. senators doesn't support Medicare for all. My member of the House doesn't support Medicare for all. I would love to vote against her. Love to vote against her. But the only way I'm going to be able to vote against her is if this movement gets real strong and other people start running against her. I mean, right now, okay, I'm going to have a Republican who takes big money running against her. And she's going to be taking less big money than the Republican running against her. So who am I going to vote for in that type of situation? I will vote against them both if there's a third party candidate to vote for who's not taking the big money. Robert Copeland, if we have a nuclear war, we may get a nuclear winter for the few people that survive the nuclear war. Yes. And that nuclear war, the nuclear war creating the nuclear winter will give us another climate emergency, just not the same kind of climate emergency we have now. Andy Candy says nuclear war plus climate disaster poisoning our water and food won't grow. We'll eat each other instead of the rich. They'll win again. No, they won't win again, because if everything collapses, Andy, their money won't be any good. Because what really stands behind the fiat money of the United States? There's only one thing, and that is the relative strength of the government, okay, and legitimacy of the government, and the strength of the economy. That's what's backing the currency. Okay, remember, the rich are very rich when it comes to currency. And they're very rich when it comes to assets that require demand to make them valuable. If there's no demand because the economy has collapsed, then what have they got? Robert says, also, we will have radiation and will kill a lot of people. Democrats will use Roe v. Wade as a fundraising issue. They always do. Joe Buddy says, or Booty says, the unvaxxed won. Okay, FJB, what is, oh, I see, FJB, okay. Joe Buddy says Bobby Kennedy would be a T-Publican today, not this woke nonsense. Woke schmoke. I mean, I don't even know what somebody's talking about when they say woke. Okay, I really don't. But that's neither here nor there. Neither here nor there. Robert Combs says, I don't like a lot of this anti-vaxxers that are in the United States now. Well, that may be, but Bobby Kennedy is not an anti-vaxxer. What he wants is testing of the vaccines, so we know what we're getting. And I'm
the same way. I'm the same way. I did not get the COVID shot. I was suspect. You know what I'm saying? I wanted to see as it rolled out. I was very cautious. but I just didn't trust it. And now we're seeing different issues.
We're seeing a very big issue when it comes to myocarditis.
Yes, we are,
There's
especially young
much too
people.
high a chance of getting myocarditis, okay, from the vaccine. And it's not clear what the causes of the myocarditis are. But that's one of uh, that's one of the effects that's showing up.
Right, and all we ask is for stuff to be tested and researched.
Yes, and that should not be even okay. And all we ask, that's part, okay, of what we have.
True.
But we want those scientific results to be good results and to be reliable and to be valid. And we
Hmm.
want the public health administrators to have respect for the science and not try to repress the scientific debate that's going on. Science is about, okay, the debate. It's about the criticism. It's about the truth emerging over time from the clash of issues and from the discussions that take place. You cannot suppress the debate and get good science. It's impossible. Good
Hmm.
science comes out of the debate. And anybody who knows about science, who studied it at any length, knows that that is the truth about science. It's not so much the outcome, it's the process that actually delivers good outcome that counts. And that process has to be a critical process where all the critical voices are heard. Andy Candy says if Biden wins again, we'll have to stock up on iodine tablets. By the way, Andy, I am eating a lot of seaweed these days. In fact, after this program, undoubtedly Bonnie and I will be taking our daily dose of seaweed. If Trump wins again, we'll have to stock up on everything and anything that fights totalitarianism. The
That's true.
resistance, yeah. If Biden wins again, we'll also have to stock up on all kinds of things to resist the crap that we'll be getting from the mainstream media and from his administration.
And that's the one thing with when Trump was in office, the media was really, really onto every little thing he did. And we noticed that they're trying to protect Biden and they don't report everything.
Yes, that is a very good point. We also have to note, though, in many instances, the media was shading the truth when it came to Trump.
Hmm.
They were acting like lawyers trying to build a case, okay, against Trump. We
That's
don't need
true.
to have the media act like that. Or maybe we do have to have the media act like that, but they need to act like that with both sides, with everybody.
True.
They have to be critical with everybody. That's what we want from the media. We want criticism. We want skepticism. We want healthy doubt so that we keep everybody honest.
That's true.
Andy Candy
And we
says
need to
dumping
have
incumbents is
discussion.
the only solution offered by anyone. Well, thank you, Andy. Except it's actually dump the corruption now because we want to make sure people dump the challengers who were bought by big money, okay, as well. It's not going to do us any good to dump the incumbents if the challengers are also bought. I'm sorry, Dee, I interrupted you.
Mm, that's fine. I
K.
don't
Ryan
remember
says,
what I said.
okay, K. Ryan says, okay, I'm out of here for tonight. Love you all. Thank you for coming, Kay. And Andy Candy says, another vaccine is getting rolled out, isn't it? For the new COVID E5 variants. Yes, it's it's a bivalent vaccine. It's supposed to be ready this fall. I don't know whether Bonnie and I will take it. We're studying the issue very carefully. It may be that the risk to benefit ratio is different for people as old as we, as opposed to younger people. Andy Kenny says, sorry, I forgot the new term, was watching some older shows all weekend. Okay, my apologies.
Yes, thank you for watching the older shows. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. I hope those were older shows of ours. Okay, I guess we're about done for tonight. I think the only one left with us right now is Andy Candy.
Okay.
So thank you, Andy. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be a neoliberalism show. I'm not entirely sure. I'm sort of thinking about doing a show that covers what the Peter G. Peterson Foundation has been saying about Social Security, what has to be done about Social Security, because as usual, it's just BS, and it's important to cover the BS. So that's what I'm thinking about, but I don't know if that's what I'm going to end up with. We'll see. So Dee, thank you very much for coming. I'm so glad that you could make it, tonight.
Thank you for having me. We had a very good conversation, very rich conversation tonight.
Yes, I think we did tonight. I think it was very rich. So let's have a lot more rich conversations.
Yes. And as for people watching the show later, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share. It's very important for Joe to pick up more subscribers. And plus, if you don't want to miss any shows, you don't miss any shows. If if you hit the notification button when you subscribe, this way you'll always be notified when Joe goes live.
Thank you, Dee. And please do contribute to our Buy Me a Coffee accounts or my Patreon account. They're very small contributions, but if we could get them up to any level, they would certainly keep the shows going.
And thank you, Andy. Andy says, yes, your shows, a few of Dee's too. My pleasure. That Ezra is a fantastic cornucopia of info. Yes, Ezra, definitely.
Yes, he was a cornucopia, okay, of info. But after a time, he wanted to go his own way. So I guess he's going to keep on doing that. I think he's trying to work himself in as a consultant to candidates. I think that's what he has in mind. But anyway, have a very nice evening. I'm sure Dee will have a show at 8 p.m. tomorrow.
Yes, I will. I'm not really sure what I'm going to be talking about. There's just so much going on everywhere. But eventually I'll round it down to what I'll be talking about tomorrow.
Yep, and so will I. So have a wonderful evening.
Yes, good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
And good night, Dee.
Yes, see you tomorrow.
Yeah.